My name is Hideki. I was once a samurai, but that was before everything changed. Everything we knew about the world shattered the moment the sun began to dim, and then disappeared altogether. I was a warrior, and all I knew was to follow my path and protect those I cared about. But what do you do when that path loses its meaning? When you can no longer rely on the light that was always there? At first, it was like a strange shadow looming over the world. We noticed that the sun began to dim. It was not an instantaneous event, it was gradual. We all thought it was a temporary phenomenon, that the next day everything would be back to normal. But the days turned into weeks, and the world grew darker and colder. The plants started wilting, and no one could figure out what was going on. I remember the moment when I first realized that the sun was disappearing. It was in the morning. I was standing in the field where we used to grow rice, and I looked up at the sky. It had turned gray and darker than ever before. Everything around me seemed normal, but I felt that something was wrong. When you were a warrior, you always listened to your intuition, and that's when it told me something terrible was coming. Fact 1. The sun is not only a source of light, but also vital to all life on Earth. Without its warmth, the average temperature on the planet would drop to minus 18 degrees Celsius in just a few weeks. This would be almost fatal for most life forms. We gathered with our neighbors and began to discuss what to do. But no one knew what was happening. We just lived our lives, trying not to think about the worst. However, I could feel the world around us changing with each passing day. The shadow over the horizon was getting heavier and heavier. We had gotten used to the sun, to its bright light. But when it began to be swallowed up by the clouds, and they would not dissipate, I realized that something more was coming over the world. When the sun disappeared completely, the world became a very different place. Darkness swallowed everything. It wasn't the usual night that goes away when you fall asleep. No, this darkness didn't go away. It was like the whole world lost its meaning. We could no longer see what was around us, and it got colder every day. I remember the first time I felt like I was missing warmth. The sun wasn't just a source of light. It was part of everything we knew. Without it, we were in a void. Fact 2. Sunlight is essential for the production of vitamin D in our bodies. Without this vitamin, we can't absorb calcium, leading to bone problems. In the long run, lack of sunlight could lead to various diseases, such as osteoporosis. We built shelters and tried to find ways to keep warm, but our strength was gradually running out. The wind did not stop and the night was eternal. The world that had once been alive and full became somehow dead, gray, as if all of nature had frozen. I began to realize that our existence depended on more than just our actions. The sun gave us strength, allowed us to live and develop. But what could we do now? We were like lost people in the vast expanse of night. My heart was filled with questions. What would happen to us? We could no longer use the land the way we used to. The plants weren't growing, the animals were gone, and we were on the verge of despair. How long could we last without light? For a long time, I tried to ignore what was happening. My life was about duty, about obligation, about protecting others. But in this new world, where there was no sun, I began to realize that I needed something more. I could no longer rely solely on my skills and old traditions. I was searching for answers within myself, trying to find meaning where there used to be light. The sun regulates circadian rhythms, our internal biological clock. Without sunlight, our brain functions begin to go haywire, leading to insomnia and mood disorders. An example is seasonal affective disorder, SAD, which occurs in people during the winter months when there is less sunlight. We started looking for ways to survive. People around me began to see things differently. We discussed what to do next, and many began to think that we needed to adapt or we would die. There were those who tried to find light in the ancient books. Others believed in the forces of nature. I began to listen to them, even if I had previously viewed such thoughts as foolishness. We were all on the brink of disaster, and there was no room for pride or fear in that darkness. We were all equally vulnerable. I realized that not everything depended on the outside world. If the sun disappeared, it didn't mean our lives had to end. We humans can find light in the most unexpected places. I began to teach others that we ourselves have the power to create light. Even if it is not as bright as it used to be, we can keep something important inside ourselves. A few months later, we found a solution that gave us hope. We started using geothermal energy, the heat that comes from the earth. Every day, we created new technologies that could support our lives. It was hard, but we realized that we could survive if we worked together. While the outside world continued to sink into darkness, we created light within ourselves. Without sunlight, plants could not perform photosynthesis, which is the basis of all life on Earth. Without photosynthesis, plants would disappear, and with them, all life that depends on them. This means that ecosystems and food chains would collapse. I thought back to my past. I was a samurai who lived for his lord. But now I was a different person. My values had changed. We were no longer dependent on the forces that had previously seemed unchangeable to us. We learned to find the light within ourselves. We began to think about how to survive not just as a tribe, but as humanity. We found answers where we had never thought to look before. We were part of this earth, and we could draw power from its very core. Time passed, and I changed. I became not only a witness to the changes, but also a part of them. I was not just a warrior, but a person who learned to look for solutions and think outside the box. In a dark world, we found light. And I no longer doubted that the future belongs to those who are willing to change, who can adapt, and who believe in themselves. I stood on the edge of a new era. Everything that came before was left behind. Now that we had survived, now that we had found ways to sustain life, we began to build a new world. A world without the sun, but with faith in our own strength. We learned that even in the darkest corners, you can find light if you look for it long enough. Years passed. We no longer counted the days, because the concept of time had changed. Since the sun disappeared, we had learned to live differently. We adapted, built new cities, found ways to warm ourselves and get food. But this world was no longer the same. People began to use underground heat sources to grow plants. We created artificial lighting systems that provided at least some replacement for sunlight. Everything changed, even ourselves. Our eyes got used to the eternal darkness. Our skin became paler, and our internal clocks no longer worked as they used to. Some people began to lose the concept of sleep and wakefulness, while others felt stronger, as if the darkness was opening up something new in us. If the sun had disappeared, the earth would still glow, but not in the usual sense. Due to residual heat and radioactive decay in the planet's core, the icy wastelands would be interrupted by geysers and volcanoes, supporting localized zones of life. I often thought about the past. Once I lived by the code of the samurai, believing that honor and duty were the most important things. But now honor did not warm you on cold nights, and duty could not save you from the darkness. Here, those who could adapt survived, not those who clung to old beliefs. The world without the sun was alien, but not lifeless. We change along with it. Sometimes I feel like the sun hasn't disappeared, but is just watching us from afar, checking to see how we'll cope without it. People weren't afraid of the dark anymore. We found order in it. Underground cities became huge, like anthills connected by a network of tunnels. Science advanced, and we learned to use the planet's energy, creating heat and electricity. We no longer waited for the sun to rise because we knew it wouldn't come. But deep down, I missed its light. Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine that golden, warm ray that touched my face at dawn. At such moments, I felt a strange melancholy. I was a samurai, and I became a survivor in a world where there were no traditions, no time. Sometimes I feel like the sun hasn't disappeared, but is just watching us from afar, checking to see how we'll cope without it. I stood on top of an icy hill and looked into the distance. Where there had once been dawn, there was now endless darkness. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cold air. I had once been a samurai, living by the laws of the past. Now, I was someone else, a man of the future. I did not know if there would ever be a new light, but I knew one thing. As long as we live, as long as we move forward, we will always seek our own dawn, and perhaps one day we will find it.